let's jump right into this explainer and unpack a really fascinating 2013 study by Manyak and Mujtaba. You know, if you've ever worked on an international team, you already know that cultural assumptions can absolutely make or break your success. So today, we're going to compare the working styles of two vastly different countries, the United States and Uganda, to see what the data actually reveals about how we as humans get things done.
Now, take a look at this core question. There is this incredibly common assumption in international business that a highly social, relationship-driven culture simply cannot also be strictly focused on hitting targets. We kind of tend to think of these two things as opposite ends of a seesaw, right? Like if socializing goes up, efficiency just has to go down. But is that actually true? To set the stage for this, let's look at the stark contrast between the two cultures we're digging into today. On one side, you have the deeply rooted American value of individualism. Americans absolutely idealize autonomy and self-reliance. Think about it. American kids are often encouraged to express their independence super early on, even just by choosing their own clothes instead of wearing mandated school uniforms. Then, on the flip side, we have Uganda. It's a nation roughly the size of the UK, but with a heavily collective culture. Ugandans often prefer what's known as a Kiganda approach. That means emphasizing strong ties to a collective, showing immense respect for social structure, having good manners, and really prioritizing consensus over any single individual standing out. So, how do we actually measure these differences in the workplace? Well, the researchers looked at work behavior through two very specific metrics. Our first one is task orientation. Essentially, this evaluates how intensely a leader or a worker focuses on strict efficiency, short-term planning, and really clear top-down communication. It's all about getting the job done. And building directly on that, our second metric is relationship orientation. This measures how much someone focuses on getting those tasks done through socio-emotional support and team motivation. Basically, a high relationship score means you are heavily committed to creating trust, developing your staff, empowering others, and really managing strong cooperative teams. Okay, so to see how Ugandans and Americans actually stack up on these two orientations, the researchers used something called the Style Questionnaire, which is widely recognized in this field. They surveyed a pretty substantial pool of 623 working adults in total. To break that down, that's 139 workers in Uganda, mostly around the Kampala metropolitan area, and 484 working adults spread across the United States. Let's look at the numbers, and right off the bat, the initial data confirms exactly what we might expect. Ugandans score significantly higher than Americans in relationship building. We're looking at a 43.12 compared to a 41.99. Now, both of those scores are actually pretty high on the questionnaires overall scale, but that distinct Ugandan preference for relationships aligns perfectly with their high-context collectivist culture, where those social ties are just absolutely paramount. Now, looking at that super high relationship score, you might naturally assume that this deep focus on socializing and consensus has to come at a cost, right? It's really easy to imagine a Western expatriate manager worrying that their Ugandan workers might avoid being, pushy to clear a backlog, or that they might actually hesitate to ask for necessary help simply because they don't want to appear rude or disrupt the team's harmony. But, and this is a huge but, that worry would be totally misplaced. Because here is the massive twist in the data. Ugandans actually outscore Americans heavily in task orientation as well. Ugandans sit at a solid mean score of 40.55, while Americans drop down to 37.63. The researchers found this difference to be statistically significant. This literally shatters that whole myth that a relationship-heavy culture can't also be laser-focused on efficiency. So, you're probably wondering, how on earth is this possible? Well, the authors propose some truly fascinating reasons for this dual success. It comes down to the dual nature of Ugandan society. First off, traditional tribal and village structures there rely heavily on hierarchical decision-making, and historically that was reinforced by strict British colonial administrative structures. So that created a heavily rule-driven, top-down society. But, crucially, this intense drive for efficiency is moderated by a high-context cultural patience, meaning they have the drive for efficiency for sure, but they still devote the exact time necessary to establish deep personal relationships. It's a really powerful combo. All right, let's move into our next section here, the gender twist, and really unpack these demographics. Because when we break this data down by gender, wow, the results are truly staggering. Take a close look at this table. Out of all the groups surveyed, Ugandan women actually have the highest task orientation score of anybody at 41.05,
all while still maintaining incredible relationship scores. Conversely, American women score the absolute lowest in task orientation, at 36.86. I mean, the gap between American men and American women in task orientation is substantial, but the gap between Ugandan women and American women, it's enormous.
To understand exactly why Ugandan women score so high in getting tasks done, we really have to look at the environment they're operating in. The authors point out the immense, almost crushing societal pressure these women face. Uganda is a heavily patriarchal society. To put it in perspective, it's still common to hear a man insulted with the phrase, "Are you a woman?" if he underperforms. And financially, women earn just 71 cents to a man's dollar. So a working woman in Uganda is quite literally forced to be incredibly task-driven and highly competent just to survive, let alone succeed, in an environment that often resents her stepping out of traditional roles.
And this contrasts so sharply with the speculative reality for American women. While they obviously face their own workforce challenges, researchers suggest American women may actually lower their task orientation to avoid social costs. In the US, cultural expectations often pressure women to be ladylike and highly relationship-oriented in their demeanor. Stepping outside of that box to be highly task-driven can carry a real social penalty, which likely leads to those much lower task scores we see in the data.
The absolute biggest takeaway here is reassurance. Expatriate leaders going into high-context cultures like Uganda can confidently expect their teams to be highly efficient and target-driven. You really don't have to choose between harmony and results, but you absolutely must respect the process. You cannot confuse the time they spend on social exchange and relationship building with being inefficient. It's just how they operate. With the right leadership that honors that cultural patience, they are absolutely going to hit those targets.
I want to leave you with something to really chew on. As the internet, global trade, and cross-border teams just continue to pull us all closer and closer together, do you think we'll eventually see these unique cultural work styles blend into one universal approach? Or will the deeply rooted histories of our home countries always dictate the subtle, fascinating ways we approach a day at the office? Because mastering these cultural subtleties, that is the true key to international success.